In many ways, Marc Mero was one of the more important figures of the Monday Night Wars. Sure, he may not have been as big of a star as Steve Austin or Hulk Hogan, and he didn't have the charisma of The Rock or Goldberg. Still, being the first wrestler in WWE to be signed to a guaranteed contract, he ended up changing the game as, once that door was opened, it would be impossible to close ever again. As well as that, he also introduced WWE audiences to one of the company's biggest female stars at the time, someone who grew so popular she would eventually go to overshadow him. But of course, there's more to his career than his WWF run. A lot more, in fact. Yes, from his time spent as Johnny B. Bad in WCW, all the way to today where he works as a motivational speaker, Mero has been on one hell of a ride. But how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey in Wild Man, the Marc Mero story. Marc Mero was born on July 9, 1960 in Buffalo, New York. And growing up there, his childhood would often be fraught with difficulties as, when he was still just 8 years old, his parents would divorce, leading his mother to support him and his two siblings alone, working 2 jobs in order to do so. And this certainly left Mero with an appreciation for the benefits of hard work, something he took to the sports world with him as, by the age of 12, he was already getting involved in hockey while studying at high school, impressing his teammates here so much that he would eventually be voted his league's MVP. So when his family relocated to Liverpool, New York soon after this, Marc would start playing for the local team there in the Mid-State Youth Hockey League. And once he turned 15, he got himself a spot in the Syracuse Stars junior hockey team too. Yes, a future in the world of hockey seemed to be coming for the youngster, but that said, it wasn't the only sport he was focused on, because while studying at Liverpool High School, he would also start playing football, with him helping his team to win the New York State Public High School Athletic Association title in his senior year. And if that wasn't enough, in the very same year, Marc would take up boxing as well when he began training under Golden Gloves coach Ray Rinaldi. After that, finding himself to be a bit of a prodigy in the ring, the youngster would win 4 New York State titles, including the New York Golden Gloves tournament on 3 separate occasions. At this point then, recognizing the success he could have here, Marc began to focus more and more on boxing, with him at this time planning to go pro. As well as this, he was also starting to get involved in bodybuilding too, going as far as to place 3rd in the Mr. New York State bodybuilding contest. Unfortunately though, his career would be sidelined around this time when he suffered a broken nose. And so at that point, feeling like the world of boxing was no longer where he wanted to be, Marc decided to start training as a pro wrestler instead, feeling that if he could no longer take part in shoot fights, he could at least keep getting in the ring for scripted ones. That was how, in 1990, he would travel to Tampa, Florida to start learning the craft under the Malenko family, with him being trained here by Boris, Joe, and Dean Malenko. After that, he would make his in-ring debut at a Florida Suncoast show in 1991, testing out the skills he'd learned as he discovered he had a natural aptitude for the squared circle. And soon, this aptitude would come to the attention of World Championship Wrestling as, later that year, the rookie would get offered a tryout at a TV taping, there losing to Doom in a squash match. But this was enough to impress WCW bosses anyway, enough that they would continue to bring him back as an enhancement talent for months thereafter, keeping a close eye on his progress as he lost to the likes of Sid Vicious. Eventually then, realizing that he had what it took to be a full-time roster member, Dusty Rhodes would sign Mero to a contract later that same year, from there repackaging him as Johnny B. Bad, a character that would take his look and mannerisms from rock and roll legend Little Richard, whose name was heavily inspired by the Chuck Berry song Johnny B. Good. Given that the gimmick had been built out of the elements of rock royalty then, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Johnny would be a natural babyface. WCW, however, obviously saw things differently, as the character would initially be portrayed as a heel, being formally introduced to audiences at the inaugural Super Brawl pay-per-view on May 19, 1991, as the newest client of Teddy Long. Only a few weeks later and he'd make his in-ring debut too, when he made short work of Kip Abey. And after that, the wins would continue to rack up as Bad was pushed as one of the company's top heels going forward, usually drawing huge heel heat with his camp antics such as his penchants for wearing feather boas to the ring or putting lip stickers on the faces of his defeated opponents. And this all led to him starting to get placed into title pictures when, on August 25th of that year, he participated in the tournament to crown a new United States champion. Unfortunately, though, in the quarterfinals of that tournament, both Bad and Yellow Dog would go to a double countout, eliminating each of them in one fell swoop. And to make matters worse, a couple of weeks later at September 5th's Clash of the Champions 16 Fall Brawl, the up-and-comer would suffer his first pinfall loss when he was beaten by Sting. Still, even being in the ring with the Stinger at this point in his career was a major feather in his cap, and so, recovering from the defeat then, the New York boy would pick up his reign of dominance again when he got a win over Jimmy Garvin at October 27th's Halloween Havoc. After that, though, the losses would start to come again, as at November 19th's Clash of the Champions 17, Bad would fail to take the light heavyweight title from Brian Pillman. And it wouldn't end there either, because on the December 22nd episode of Main Event, he would team with Diamond Stud to take on Tom Zink and PN News in a losing effort. Luckily, though, a much-needed change was on the horizon, as after that tag team loss, Johnny would be attacked by both his partner and Diamond Dallas Page, causing the winning team to run to the back to save him, turning the New Yorker face in the process. So now, reinvigorated as part of the good guys, Johnny would start bringing his Bad Blaster to the ring with him, a confetti gun that fired into the crowd before each one of his matches. And once in the ring, he would pick up a number of victories over the likes of Ricky Morton and Tracy Smothers during the first half of 1992, cementing himself as one of the top mid-card babyfaces on the show. Following this, Bad would get into a feud with DDP and Scotty Flamingo, the latter of whom is more commonly remembered now for his later character, Raven. And this one would even see the former Golden Gloves champion get to show off his boxing skills once more too, when he took on Flamingo in a boxing match at the November 18th Clash of the Champions 21. Then, as 1993 rolled around, his next program would present itself when he began getting intertwined with Cactus Jack, initially teaming with him as part of the Lethal Lottery at December's Starrcade, then coming to blows with him soon thereafter as they finally settled things in the ring at January 13th's Clash of the Champions 22. After losing that match, though, the New York boy's momentum would stall somewhat, as he next started a beef with Max Payne, this coming after Payne had laid him out with his finisher, the Painkiller, that February. And to make matters worse, when they finally went one-on-one at June 16th's Clash of the Champions 23, Bad would end up losing via forfeit after his opponent had kayfabe hurt him with his own Bad Blaster prior to the match. This then would lead to Johnny wearing a face mask for a while going forward so as to protect his facial injuries as they healed. And with this extra level of protection, he was eventually able to get his revenge on his rival when the two met once more at August 18th's Clash of the Champions 24 in a mask versus guitar match that saw the babyface pick up the win. So, with that all put to bed, the rising star would next set his sights on winning gold, as he challenged Lord Steven Regal for the WCW Television Championship at November 10th's Clash of the Champions 25. And although he would lose that night, it would spark a fire in him that would see him become determined to take the belt home next time he got a chance. Before this, though, in his personal life, he would get married to his longtime girlfriend Rena, someone who would end up becoming a big player in the wrestling industry herself in the years to come, but we'll get there. In the meantime, as 1994 began, Bad found himself on a high, as, now a newlywed, he hoped to impress his new bride by winning a title. And his next opportunity to do this would come on February 12th where, on an episode of Saturday Night, he would challenge Rick Rude for the International World Heavyweight title. Ultimately, though, in spite of a valiant effort that night, Bad would not be able to beat the champion. So trying something else then, he would form a tag team with Michael Hayes that saw the two feud with Harlem Heat for a while. That said, it didn't take long for Hayes to show his true heel colors, as he would end up turning on his partner just a couple of weeks later, starting a program between the two that would see them supposed to face off at February 20th's Super Brawl 4, all until Hayes would be replaced at the last second by Jimmy Garvin that was, someone who the babyface then went on to defeat anyway. And as a result of this victory, Johnny would get a shot at the United States title, which was then being held by stunning Steve Austin, as the two met one-on-one at May 22nd's Slamboree. But despite losing this one, Bad would get his rematch just 1 month later at Clash of the Champions 27 where, for a brief moment, it actually looked like he'd finally achieved his goal to win a title, all before screwy antics would see Austin walk away with the strap still around his waist. And his next attempt wouldn't fare any better than as, at July 17th's Bash at the Beach, he would once again challenge Steven Regal for the TV title and would once again lose. Thankfully then, this would be his last failure, as when he and Regal met for a third time at September 18th's Fall Brawl, he would finally get the better of the champion, beating him there to become what he always knew he could be. But now that he had the belt, he couldn't take his foot off the gas because there was a constant flow of challengers who wanted to take him on. So, systematically starting to go through these one by one, Bad would start racking up defenses against the likes of Bobby Eaton, the Honky Tonk Man, and Arn Anderson in the months that followed. Ultimately, though, it would be the latter performer who, in a rematch on the January 8, 1995 episode of Main Event, would dethrone the champion. And while the feud would continue on between the two for a while after that, even seeing them take part in a boxer versus wrestler match at March 19th's uncensored pay-per-view, ultimately Johnny would be unable to win the title back. So, moving on from this, he would mill around the mid-card for a while during the first half of 1995 as he searched for something new to sink his teeth into. And this would eventually come after he defeated Brian Pillman to become the new #1 contender to the United States Championship in September, with him then set to receive his shot later that month when he took on Sting during an episode of Saturday Night. But before that match could get in the ring, Bad would be attacked by the, at the time, TV champion Diamond Dallas Page. And this would see the former TV champ spin back off into that title picture instead when he took on DDP for the belt at October 29th's Halloween Havoc, defeating him there to start his second reign on top. After that, the feud would continue with a rematch at the inaugural World War III show on November 26th where, not only would the champ regain his title, but he would also, as per a pre-match stipulation, be able to free DDP's long-suffering valet, Diamond Doll, from her services. And thankful for this then, she would remain in Bad's corner for a while going forward, all as he continued to defend his television title for the next few months. Sadly though, this run would come to an end too on February 18, 1996, when at a house show, Johnny would drop the belt to Lex Luger. And while he would win it back again the next night, during the rubber match on the March 9th episode of Saturday Night, it would be Lex who ultimately would come out on top. And the reason for this, as it happened, was that, disagreeing with the angle that saw him have DDP's real-life wife Kimberly acting as his valet, he decided to quit the company. Sure, some might have seen this as, at best, a short-sighted decision and, at worst, career suicide, giving up such a prominent spot for something as relatively trivial as an angle which both Page and Kimberly seemed to be on board with. That said, a man of conviction, Bad would bet on himself anyway, as he had by then attracted the interest of WWE, with them bringing him on board soon thereafter as their newest big-time signing. What Vince McMahon didn't seem to realize when he signed the WCW star, however, was that, due to copyright restrictions, he wasn't actually able to bring the Johnny B. Bad gimmick with him. And this understandably left the boss upset then, as not only had he brought the WCW star over, but he'd signed him to a big money guaranteed contract, something which no one else on the roster had at that time. And while this would leave the new signing with a lot of heat backstage, with many looking for any reason to knock him down from there, it would, as the Monday Night Wars continued to heat up, eventually become the norm for the company, making Mero something of a game-changer for the industry. And yes, it was Marc Mero again now, as, unable to keep playing the flamboyant rock star knockoff, McMahon had created a new character for his latest acquisition, Wildman Marc Mero, a Tarzan-themed gimmick that saw the New Yorker perform a lot of high-flying moves, all while coming to the ring in full leopard print gear. But that wasn't all, as like Tarzan had Jane, the Wildman had his own lady in the form of Sable, his real-life wife Rena. Yes, Rena had, prior to this, been acting as a temporary valet to Hunter Hearst Helmsley, and so, with him treating her poorly, it would give Mero the perfect opportunity to debut on the April 1st episode of Raw, so as to defend her honor. From there, instantly falling in love with Sable, whose looks placed her in the same mold as other 90s stars such as Pamela Anderson, Vince McMahon and his head writer at the time, Vince Russo, would begin to give both her and her husband a higher spot on the card as, in the weeks that followed, Mark started racking up wins against the likes of Isaac Yankem, Owen Hart, and Triple H himself. But even this early on, it was clear that management saw one member of the act as the star, and it certainly wasn't the Wildman. Something which, to be fair, was mirrored in the audience reactions Sable was getting at the time from the mid-90s audience made up mostly of young men. And this slide into irrelevancy for her husband would begin to present itself when he fell to Stone Cold Steve Austin in the semifinals of the King of the Ring on June 23rd. All this before then losing again to Goldust at August 18th SummerSlam. Luckily though, when both Vinces eventually realized that their new favorite diva's success was directly tied to the success of Mero, they'd start booking him stronger in early September as, after Ahmed Johnson had been forced to vacate the Intercontinental title due to injury, Mark would take place in a tournament to crown a new champion. And after going through Steve Austin and Owen Hart in the weeks prior then, come the September 23rd episode of Raw, the Wild Man would pin Farouk to take home the belt for his own, this marking his first and only big title win in WWE. But this run wouldn't last long unfortunately as, on the October 21st episode of Raw, the champ would drop the strap to Helmsley, who was already by then seen as the far bigger prospect. And after that, Mero's woes would continue as he would fail to win the title back during the rematch at December 15th's In Your House 12, It's Time. Following this, after a disappointing showing in the 1997 Royal Rumble a month later, where he would be eliminated by the eventual winner, Stone Cold Steve Austin, he would get one more shot at the game on the February 3rd episode of Raw, losing again here, and then tearing a ligament in his leg soon thereafter. Yes, things weren't looking good for the New Yorker, and to make matters worse, his wife was already surpassing him in both popularity and TV time by this point, often getting segments of her own while he was out with injury. So realizing he had to try something new, when Mark returned on the October 6th episode of Raw, it would be under a new gimmick, one far closer to his real-life history as a Golden Gloves champion as he became Marvelous Marc Mero, a boxer turned wrestler who would use his new finisher, the TKO, to take down opponents. And while this did work for a little while, soon Mero would begin to be overshadowed by Sable once more as he began undergoing a heel turn that saw him act more abusive towards her, jealous of the reactions she was getting from the fans. This, though, only got audiences more and more behind his wife, and so from there, he would continue to fall in importance when compared to her. And it didn't help things when Mark would align himself with Goldust and Luna Vachon in early 1998, as together, all three tried to make Sable's life a living hell. That whole feud, in fact, would lead to a mixed tag match at March 29th's WrestleMania 14 where, still cautiously together at this point, Mero and Sable would defeat the heels, albeit with all of the focus now being on the blonde bombshell. So, incensed by this, the Golden Gloves boxer would challenge his wife to a match at May 31st's Over the Edge pay-per-view, where the stipulation was that, if he could beat her, then she would have to leave WWE forever. And of course, he did beat her that night, albeit with a cheap roll-up after pretending he'd had a change of heart. So, with Sable now gone, at least for the time being, Mero picked up a new manager in the form of Jacqueline, someone who stood by his side as he further damaged his credibility by taking part in the infamous Brawl for All that summer, eventually losing to Bradshaw in the second round. After that, and things would get worse when Sable returned, now intent on embarrassing her man as she teamed with Edge to defeat Mero and Jacqueline at August 30th's SummerSlam. From there, his fate was sealed, as after taking a powerbomb from his wife, Mark became little more than a jobber, losing to the likes of Val Venus, Big Boss Man, and Gillberg, all while elsewhere, Sable's rise up the card continued. Yes, it was a double-edged sword at this point as, behind the scenes, while he was happy for his wife's success, he was also frustrated with his own spot on the card. In the end, though, the decision of whether to try his luck elsewhere or remain by Sable's side and support her in WWE would be made for him when in mid-1999, she would quit the company after claiming she'd been harassed, with this pretty much forcing her husband to follow her out the door. And after this, due to his contract still being active, Mero wouldn't wrestle for the next 18 months, with him only making a brief cameo appearance in the crowd at a WCW Thunder taping during this period, the reason for which being that, at the time, he was in talks to return to WCW. However, when that company went under the following year, this was obviously taken off the table. So instead, Mark would return to the indie circuit, showing up for the likes of X Wrestling Federation and Total Nonstop Action Wrestling over the next couple of years. And during this time, he and Sable would also end up getting divorced, something which contributed towards him deciding to retire from the ring altogether in 2006 as he changed course by taking up a career in motivational speaking, a career path that has continued for him to this day, with his 2010 book, How to Be the Happiest Person on the Planet, finding him much success and helping him to continue building his brand. So at the end of the day, while he never reached the heights of some of his peers, it's hard to think of Marc Mero's career as anything less than a success because he came out of it seemingly at peace and fulfilled, something we sadly can't say for many others before and after him. And ultimately, that's what's important, and certainly the thing that makes him the happiest person on the planet. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.